Imagine for a moment the profound and heavy stillness that descends upon the earth just before a massive storm breaks. That silence is not a sign of weakness or a lack of energy. It is a gathering of immense potential, a concentrated center of power from which the very direction of the coming winds is determined. Most of us have been conditioned from a young age to believe that to be heard in our families, to maintain order in our households, or to influence the behavior of our loved ones, we must use the volume of our voices. We have been led to believe that louder commands, longer lectures, and constant, exhausting debate are the only tools at our disposal to keep things from falling apart. But the truth is quite the opposite. The more you shout, the less your words are actually worth. True influence, the kind of influence that shifts a person's heart, humbles their ego, and changes the entire frequency of a room, lives in the silence that emanates from your internal dignity, your unwavering patience, and your steady, non-reactive presence. Stay with me until the very end of this conversation, because I am going to reveal a specific silent influence technique that allows you to heal a fractured household atmosphere and reclaim your respect without ever uttering a single angry word. Method that works because it bypasses the brain and speaks directly to the soul. This reminds me of a news story. I read recently about a legendary old schoolmaster in a rural village whose classroom was famously quiet, even when he wasn't physically in the room. When he was eventually asked by a younger teacher if he ruled with an iron fist or used fear to intimidate the children into submission, he smiled gently and said, "I simply wait until they can feel the weight of my silence. They aren't afraid of my words. They are afraid of the quietness, the fear that they might disappoint someone who is so deeply at peace with himself." It is a spontaneous and powerful realization that when you finally stop talking, other people finally start thinking. They are no longer busy preparing their next defense against your words. Instead, they are left alone with the echoes of their own actions. In our homes today, arguments often drag on for hours or even years, because we have fallen into the trap of listening only to respond rather than to understand. We treat our words like weapons, hurling them back and forth until everyone involved is emotionally exhausted, spiritually drained, and deeply wounded. When we learn to use silence as a sanctuary rather than a wall of coldness, we hold up a mirror to the other person. This isn't about controlling others through cold-hearted manipulation. It is about controlling the spiritual atmosphere of your home by first mastering yourself. When you remain silent in the face of a deliberate provocation, you immediately become the master of that moment. You take the remote control of your emotions back from the hands of the person trying to upset you. Fire needs fuel to grow and spread, and your reactive, angry words are that fuel. By withholding them, you allow the flames of conflict to die out naturally, leaving only the cooling ash of reflection. Consider the dynamic of a typical family argument. One person shouts, and the other person's ego immediately feels attacked. This triggers a biological fight or flight response. They stop hearing your logic and start focusing entirely on surviving the verbal onslaught. By the time the shouting match is over, no one has learned anything, and the original problem remains unsolved, now buried under layers of resentment. Now, imagine the alternative. Someone speaks to you with disrespect or anger, and you simply look at them. You don't roll your eyes, you don't huff, and you don't walk away in a huff. You simply remain present, breathing calmly and looking at them with a gaze of quiet compassion. In that silence, the person who is shouting becomes painfully aware of their own volume. They hear the harshness of their own voice. They see the ugliness of their own anger reflected against the calm lake of your stillness. This is the invisible command. You are commanding the situation not by force, but by the sheer weight of your character. We must understand that silence is a form of communication that is much older and much more honest than spoken language. Words can be used to lie, to distract, and to hide behind. But a dignified silence reveals the truth of who you are. It shows that you are a person who cannot be easily shaken. It shows that your peace of mind is not for sale. For a child who is acting out, or a spouse who is lashing out, your silence acts as a boundary. It says, "I will not join you in this chaos." It is a boundary made of iron, but wrapped in velvet. It is firm, yet it is not aggressive. This is how you begin to reclaim the leadership of your family, not as a dictator, but as a lighthouse. A lighthouse doesn't move, and it doesn't shout at the ships to stay off the rocks. It simply stands there, shining its light in total silence, providing a point of reference for everyone else to find their way home. Silence is not merely the absence of speech. It is a profound and weighted form of presence. In the context of a family, it is the art of making your existence so spiritually substantial, and your dignity so apparent that words often become redundant. When a leader, be it a parent, a spouse, or an elder, performs their duties with a quiet, steady resolve and avoids the trap of petty bickering, they establish a silent authority that no one can truly challenge. It is an authority built on the bedrock of character rather than the shifting sands of volume. This is the difference between a person who demands respect and a person who commands it. One uses their lungs, the other uses their soul. This transition reminds me of what we discussed in our previous journey regarding hearing your subconscious wisdom. We touched upon how our inner wisdom works most effectively in stillness rather than in the midst of noise. On a psychological level, the people in your life, your children, your partner, your siblings are far more influenced by the silent signals of your actions than by the constant stream of your verbal advice. When you quiet the noise of your own emotional reactions, you create a vacuum that the other person's subconscious begins to fill. They start receiving messages of strength, stability, and high expectations that your tongue could never convey, no matter how eloquently you spoke. I once watched a scene in a classic film that left a lasting impression on my heart. A mother discovered that her teenage son had made a serious mistake, something that would normally trigger a 3-hour lecture or a shouting match. Instead of launching into an angry tirade, she sat down across from him, looked into his eyes with a gentle, silent sadness for nearly a minute, and then simply stood up and went back to her work. That son was haunted by that silence for days. He couldn't hide behind a defensive argument because there was no argument to join. He was left alone in the room with his own conscience, which eventually forced him to apologize and change his behavior. If she had shouted, he would have focused on her anger as a justification for his own rebellion. Because she was silent, he was forced to focus on the reality of his own actions. This is the law of human nature. The deeper the ocean, the more still it is, yet its power is immeasurable. To master this sound of presence, one must first understand the difference between the silent treatment and the power of silence. The silent treatment is a weapon of the weak. It is used to punish, to alienate, and to manipulate others into submission by making them feel invisible. It is rooted in passive aggression and ego. True silence, however, is a gift of the strong. It is not about ignoring the other person. It is about being so present that you don't need to speak to be felt. It is about holding your ground while remaining emotionally available. When you are silent in this way, you are not closing a door. You are opening a space for the other person to grow into. In a household where everyone is shouting to be heard, the person who chooses to be silent becomes the most interesting and powerful person in the room. Why? Because they are the only one who isn't losing control. We tend to follow the person who is the least anxious. In any family crisis, whether it has a financial struggle or a broken vase, if you are the one who remains quiet, calm, and observant, the eyes of the family will naturally turn toward you. They are looking for an anchor. By not adding to the noise, you become the point of reference for the entire family's emotional state. This silent authority is particularly effective in parenting. Children are biologically programmed to test boundaries. When they push a boundary and you react with a long, frustrated lecture, You are actually rewarding their behavior with your undivided attention and emotional energy. You are teaching them that they can control your mood. However, when you respond to a provocation with a calm, silent look that says, "I am disappointed, and I expect better from you," and then you return to your task, you are taking the power back. You are telling them that your peace is too valuable to be traded for a petty argument. In that silence, the child has to sit with the weight of their own choices. They begin to understand that their actions have consequences that go deeper than just a timeout. They have the consequence of shifting the respect in their relationship with you. The third and perhaps most transformative stage of mastering silence within the family is understanding that your quietness acts as a profound, unwavering mirror. When someone, be it an impulsive teenager, a frustrated spouse, or a rebellious sibling, is lashing out in anger or throwing a tantrum of ego, and you choose to meet that storm with a calm, dignified silence, you are essentially holding up a reflection to their very soul. Against the backdrop of your absolute stillness, the ugliness of their words, the harshness of their tone, and the irrationality of their demands become impossible for them to ignore. In any other situation, their anger would find a target in your reaction, allowing them to justify their heat as a defense against yours. But when there is no counterattack, their own poison has nowhere to go but back into their own heart. But because you have refused to surrender the remote control of your emotions to their volatility, suffocating weight of household stress, I invite you to pause for just 5 seconds right now, to defend your honor, or to strike back with a witty or hurtful comment. Tell that urge, "My peace is not a slave to someone else's lack of control." This small internal pause gives you a power that 1,000 well-crafted arguments never could. It is the power of the observer rather than the victim. A viewer shared a story with me last month that illustrates this mirror effect perfectly. She lived with a husband who had developed a habit of starting arguments over the smallest, most insignificant inconveniences, the way the groceries were packed or the temperature of the tea. For years, she had fought back, defending herself and explaining her logic, which only served to fuel his fire and extend the conflict for hours. Finally, she decided on a different path. For one entire week, she made a silent pact with herself. She would not respond to any provocation with a single word of defense. She would perform her tasks with a calm, silent grace, and when he began to shout, she would simply look at him with a gaze of soft, non-judgmental awareness. By the third day, something remarkable happened. Her husband started a critique of the dinner she had prepared, raising his voice as he usually did. She said nothing. She didn't look away in shame, nor did she roll her eyes in contempt. She simply sat there, present and peaceful. Her husband stopped mid-sentence. He looked at her, then looked at the dinner, and then looked at the empty space where her angry response should have been. For the first time in years, he actually heard his own voice echoing in the quiet room. The silence was so uncomfortable for his ego that he was forced to see himself clearly. He eventually sat down and said, "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm so angry today." This is the miracle of the mirror. Your silence allowed him to stop fighting you and start confronting himself. This control we speak of is not about being a cold or distant statue. It is about mindful non-responsiveness. When you are silent, you are actually collecting data. You are seeing the patterns of the other person's heart. You are seeing where they are hurting, because anger is almost always a mask for pain or fear. By not joining the argument, you remain the adult in the room. You become the person who holds the space for the other person to eventually calm down and find their own way back to sanity. It is important to remember that the human ego is like a parasite. It feeds on the energy of conflict. When you deny it that energy through silence, the ego of the other person begins to starve. They may try harder at first. They may say even meaner things or shout even louder just to get a rise out of you. This is the ultimate test of your strength. If you can hold your silence during this extinction burst of their anger, you will see a profound shift. They will have to find a new, more respectful way to communicate with you, because you have made it impossible for them to communicate with you through chaos. Furthermore, this silence teaches the rest of the family, especially children, how to handle their own emotions. You are providing them with a blueprint for conflict resolution that doesn't involve trauma. You are showing them that it is possible to be powerful without being loud. You are teaching them that the person who is the most in control of themselves is the one who ultimately leads the family, but because of the high standard of peace you have set with your own behavior. Within the intricate tapestry of a family, silence can often say things that the tongue is simply too clumsy, too biased, or too limited to express. Think of silence not as a void, but as the primary language of the soul. When words are exhausted, when arguments have failed, and when logic has reached its dead end, feelings begin to speak through the vibrations of our presence. This is a sacred form of communication. It is the language used in the most profound moments of human existence. In the silent gaze of a mother holding her newborn, in the wordless comfort offered to a grieving friend, or in the shared quietude of a couple watching a sunset after 50 years of marriage. In these moments, words would only serve to shrink the experience. By bringing this language of the soul into the mundane, often chaotic discipline of daily family life, you are inviting a higher frequency of existence into your home. This connects deeply to our previous discussion about the signs a person may be in their final year. We noted that as a soul prepares to depart its physical vessel, communication often shifts from literal, practical words to metaphors, symbols, and deep, heavy silences. This final silence is not empty. It is a sacred teacher. It is the soul's way of processing an entire lifetime of experiences into a single, quiet essence. Why should we wait until the very end of our lives to learn this language of depth? Why should we wait until the final hour to realize that our most important messages were never meant to be shouted? By intentionally removing the poison of unnecessary, reactive words from our daily interactions and replacing them with the honey of a purposeful silence, we can start a dialogue with our loved ones' souls today. We can begin to walk them home to a place of peace every single evening. I recently read a beautiful account of a man who lived in a neighborhood plagued by petty disputes and loud, competitive gardening. Instead of building a high, imposing wall around his property or engaging in legal battles with his neighbors, he simply started planting trees and tending to his garden in total, humble silence. As the months passed, his neighbors watched his peaceful, non-reactive behavior. They saw how he didn't join in the gossip or the complaints. Slowly, almost magically, the neighbors began to instinctively respect his boundaries without a single word of negotiation ever being exchanged. His silence had set a spiritual frequency that compelled others to rise to his standard of peace. This is the ultimate power of silence. It aligns you with the rhythm of the universe, and your family, like those neighbors, is naturally and almost involuntarily drawn toward that tranquility. In our homes, we often use words to fix people. We tell our children how to be better. We tell our partners how to change, and we tell ourselves why we are failing. But have you ever noticed that the more you try to fix someone with words, the more they resist you? This is because words often carry the hidden energy of judgment. Silence, however, carries the energy of acceptance. When you sit in silence with a struggling teenager, you are telling them, "I see your pain, and I don't need to change you for me to be at peace." This silent acceptance is far more powerful than any lecture on behavior. It creates a vacuum of safety where the other person feels free to lower their guard. It is in this space of non-judgment that true transformation happens. You are not controlling their actions through force. You are controlling the environment so that their soul feels safe enough to heal itself. Furthermore, we must recognize that silence is the best protector of our own internal energy. Every time we engage in a useless argument, we are leaking our life force. We are giving away our prana, our vital energy, to a situation that doesn't deserve it. When you choose silence, you are essentially capping that leak. You are choosing to keep your energy for your own growth and for the positive nourishment of your family. Imagine your energy as a reservoir of water. Every angry word is a crack in the dam. Over time, if you keep arguing, your reservoir runs dry, and you find yourself burned out, resentful, and unable to love. Silence is the act of repairing that dam. It is a form of spiritual self-care that allows you to remain a fountain of peace for those who rely on you. This language of the soul also requires us to become masters of nonverbal communication. Scientific studies have shown that over 90% of human communication is nonverbal. It's in our posture, our breathing, the tension in our jaw, and the light in our eyes. When you are silent, people become hyper-aware of these signals. If your silence is cold and brittle, they will feel it as a threat. But if your silence is warm and expansive, they will feel it as a hug. This is why it is so important to do the internal work. You cannot fake a peaceful silence if your heart is full of hidden rage. You must use your quiet moments to truly forgive, to truly let go, and to truly find your own center. When you do this, your silence becomes a holy silence, a presence so powerful that it can de-escalate a shouting match simply by being in the room. You become a living prayer, a walking sanctuary that reminds everyone in the family that there is a place of peace available to them, if only they are willing to be still. As we reach the final stage of our journey into the power of silence, we come to understand that controlling the atmosphere of your family is not about being a dictator of words, but a master of your own spirit. A truly wise person knows that while speech may be silver, silence is the ultimate gold that buys the lifelong respect of the human heart. When you master the art of knowing when to speak, and, more importantly, when to remain still, a single sentence from you eventually carries more weight than 1,000 sentences from someone who is always talking. You become the master of the night, the lighthouse of the home who remains steady while the storms of daily life rage around you. You become the one point of stability that every member of the family instinctively looks toward when the world gets too loud, too chaotic, or too confusing. The silent influence technique I mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation is a practice I call the anchor of stillness. It is remarkably simple, yet it has the power to shift the chemistry of a room in seconds. Whenever you feel the tension rising in your home, whether it's a heated argument with your spouse, a rebellious moment with a child, or even your own internal frustration, do not move from your place. Do not let the heat of anger enter your eyes. Instead, ground your feet firmly on the floor, keep your hands relaxed, and focus entirely on the rhythm of your own breath. Count 4 seconds in and 4 seconds out. Do not speak. Do not defend yourself. Just breathe. In that deliberate, non-reactive state, your nervous system begins to send out a frequency of safety. Because humans are biologically wired to mirror the emotions of the most stable person in the room, your calm presence will begin to de-escalate the heart rates of everyone around you. You are not fighting the conflict. You are simply refusing to be a part of it. Within minutes, the person who is shouting will find it physically and psychologically impossible to maintain their volume against your absolute stillness. They will stop, they will reflect. And in that silence, true communication can finally begin. This is the ultimate control, a control that is not forced, but invited through the sheer strength of a quiet, unshakable spirit. This reminds me of a personal reflection I had while watching the transition from a late summer evening into a deep, starry night. The day is full of noise, activity, and the scorching heat of the sun, but the night doesn't argue with the day. The night doesn't try to shout the sun down. It simply arrives. It brings its coolness, its vastness, and its silence. And eventually, every living thing, no matter how busy or loud it was during the day, bows to the peace of the night. You can be that night for your family. You can be the coolness that heals the heat of their day. You can be the vastness that makes their small problems feel lighter. As we close this conversation, I want you to remember that the goal of this practice is not to create a home where no one speaks, but to create a home where every word spoken is rooted in love and respect. Silence is the soil in which that respect grows. By choosing your moments of quietude, you are protecting the sanctuary of your own peace. You are teaching your loved ones that your presence is a gift, and your words are a treasure. These small daily choices to remain silent in the face of anger are the building blocks of a legacy of wisdom. You are showing the next generation that power does not come from the lungs, but from the depth of the heart. I would be so deeply honored to know where you are joining us from today. Please share the name of your city or country in the comments below. Here at Ecos Del Tiempo TV, we simply try to make life's heavier and more complicated questions feel lighter without any judgment. Our purpose is to help you find that quiet center within yourself, so you can lead your life and your family with grace. Please share your thoughts, your struggles with family conflict, or a time when your silence was more powerful than 1,000 words. Your shared experiences often inspire our next conversation and remind us that we are all walking each other home through the noise of this world. Until we meet again, may you find the strength that lives in the quiet.